Minicini just said, I am Mitch. I was a student at the Thornhill campus of Life Academy. As you all saw in the documentary, you now know what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome / EDS is, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch it and understand, because one of the big reasons I'm here is to just spread awareness of not just EDS specifically, but invisible disabilities like one that I have in general. Invisible disabilities being having a disability, but I look pretty normal. I have a lot of bruises from a lot of blood tests I had done. My eyes are a bit red, but from where you're sitting, I probably look pretty normal, even though I'm in a lot of pain. I have that cane. I'm putting all my weight on this instead of standing normally. And so at first glance, people would find it hard to believe that I have very extensive health problems. And that's a problem, the not believing part. So I want to stop that from happening, and that's why I put the effort in to come here to talk to all of you. So you know what EDS is in a basic sense now, but what you might not know is that there's quite a lot of people you've probably heard of that have EDS. I've got this small list: Jamila Jamal, that amazing actress; Lena Dunham; Sia, the singer. Michael Jackson was never confirmed, but the doctoral consensus is that he had it. As you all saw, his hypermobility with his crazy dance moves and all that. And Yvie Oddly from RuPaul's Drag Race, who's very transparent and also wants to spread awareness in her performances on that show. And so I actually, in that second tab there, want to show you just a 60-second performance of her on that RuPaul's Drag Race show. So for those who don't watch the show, that's Yvie Oddly. So that's why I'm showing it. She's actually making use of her flexibility, hypermobility, those are basically the same thing, in her performances. But these performances come at a cost. Basically, anyone with this condition who's always fatigued, it comes at a cost to do what you want to do, no matter what it is. And so she is very open about sharing those sacrifices. Here's a quote from her about EDS. The longer I live with Ehlers-Danlos, the more rapidly I can feel my body deteriorating. So to see that reflected back on screen so clearly, to me, has taken some great reconciliation with the inevitable. So that I say, you go, girlfriend. But basically, it's not easy, and she actually had to kind of drop out at certain points because of the pain. Doing a performance like that cost. Like, I couldn't do that. My legs are where most of my pain is. So I just find it quite inspiring to see her be on the show, putting herself out there, making her condition to the advantage of her performance. But the person in that list I gave a second ago of people with EDS, celebrities specifically, the one I relate to most is actually Michael Jackson. And that's not because I'm a good singer or a good dancer, as you would expect. It's because of our circumstance that kind of ended up leading to his death in the end. He was a world-class performer, as we all know. And so to keep those performances going, it takes a lot. And your condition can deteriorate without warning, either gradually or suddenly. And so he wants to keep doing those performances. That's his job. That's what he loves doing. And so he'll do that maybe at any cost, maybe at too great a cost. Because he's Michael Jackson, it's very hard for his doctors to tell him no. He says, I need better sleeping pills to be able to do that performance tomorrow, and I need it right now, and I demand you give it to me. I don't know that conversation that happened, but he was getting dangerous levels of various medications at that point, and that's what killed him in the end. And so I can relate to that. I can relate to wanting to take the next step in terms of treatments, even if they're risky steps, just to keep your life afloat, to not lose all your functioning, that's your job, that's what you love doing. And so I have to be careful. Uh, like I'm not Michael Jackson, so I'm in less danger, I would say, from doctors just saying, yes, you can have all these medications at the same time. I still get them, but more gradually. So the next thing I wanted to discuss is in the documentary, you saw a contortionist throughout the film. Her name is Toria, and she just yesterday passed in Canada's Got Talent. All 4 judges gave approval to move on in that competition. And so the reason I wanted to bring her up is the documentary has gotten tons of amazing feedback. And really the only negative feedback we gotten at any point at all is a few people saying that they're concerned overall that contortionist performance that she did. They think that it's dangerous, will damage your joints over time, and people with EDS, they say, are born with the joints of an 8-year-old. So I'm kind of scared to find out what happens when I'm 80, because EDS is only kind of in the public conscience in the past couple of decades, really. So we don't really know. There's not many elderly people diagnosed with EDS, is my point. And so a lot of people are saying Toria shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't be bending like she did in that way. And they like can kind of like say it callously. I hated seeing that in their comments, like on YouTube and whatever. But the problem is let's compare it to professional football players, right? So we all know that they get a million concussions throughout their career, and that causes damage, permanent damage sometimes. But are we going to ban football? Are we going to say they're not allowed to take those risks when it's their livelihood, their passion? It's the exact same for Toria. She's a professional contortionist, and it's her passion. And she's extremely well trained in how to do these moves safely. But maybe someone might think it's a bad example, but it's just like on shows like Jackass, they say at the beginning, do not try this at home, right? I think it's obvious that unless you're a trained contortionist, you're not going to do all these crazy moves. And if you're not a professional football player, you shouldn't go tackling people 40 times your size. So I think that we have to be more understanding of people making their own risks, making their own lives. We shouldn't demand or ban these things, football, contortionism, just because it'd be a bad idea for us to try it on that level. And so the next kind of discussion is, what is a disability? Everyone, I think, would have a different definition here. Does anyone want to mention what they think a disability is? There's no wrong answers. It's okay if not, though. Yes?
Something that affects your day-to-day life in an unwell way.
So that's a good definition, because it's not just what's disabling for some person. We all have different lives, right? So what's disabling in someone's life may not be a problem much at all in another person's life. There's all different kinds of disabilities. There's, I'm not going to pronounce these right, dyscalculia, which is math. You just cannot learn how to do even basic math if you have this learning disability. There's dysphagia, which is a writing disability. We all know dyslexia, which is a reading disability. So these are all learning disabilities. These are not what I have to deal with, which is a physical one. But the point is it was a good definition, because if it affects your daily life and you're not able to do something that is important to your daily life, and then you're disabled in that sense. The UN definition on what a disability actually is internationally is this: the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities describes those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. And so, for example, if we can go to the picture of my pills, if that's, yeah, there they are. So my point with showing this picture, these are how many pills I use in a single day. And so the problem with having many different kinds of disabilities is there's hidden problems that you don't just see at first glance if you're not the one experiencing it. For example, taking, I think it was 43 pills a day, is very time consuming. Managing fulfilling my doctor's request to do Excel spreadsheets of every possible detail. Do we have that there too, actually? Uh, for my sleep doctors, because I am on a crazy combination of medications that scares me in the same way it would scare people for Michael Jackson. So this is a partial. It's not showing everything. I didn't want to list the full medication list and other notes at the bottom, but these are every day that I have to fill this out for at the request of my sleep doctors to be able to understand what's going on at these very high doses I'm on and keep things safe. And so my point is that there's a million other things I could list that are so time consuming. It's even if I had the ability to move around and stand up and for more than a few minutes at a time, if I still had to do all these things, I'd still be pretty disabled and find it hard to have a full-time job in any way because of the time consuming going to doctor's appointments. I had a stroke actually July 5th at the age of 27, and that means a million more doctor's appointments. And trust me, I had a million going on each week, plenty before a stroke. And so doing well, if you have a serious health condition, it takes your time. And the time loss of time can be disabling in getting things basic in life done as well. And so like now, basically all these doctors wanted a piece of me because I'm such an interesting patient. Unfortunately, I wish I wasn't. But having strokes at the age of 27, having one of the rare sleep conditions in the world, blah, 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 and many more other rare conditions that weren't in the documentary because they happened since the documentary was filmed. But now that I've had the stroke and everything, forget about any free time in over weeks quite often. And so the next question I wanted to ask is a disability subjective? We were just kind of saying that sort of it is, but do they exist in a vacuum? Or do they only exist when society makes demands of us and we don't fulfill those demands? Is that really kind of the real point of a disability when you cannot? It was in the UN Convention I was reading that if you can't participate in society on an equal basis on things that are demanded in society, then I suppose you're disabled in that sense, no matter what it is, because we all have different societies, cultures across the world. And so what's disabling in one may not be disabling in the other. So I think one important thing to talk about is how can you help? I'm sure a lot of you have friends who maybe not with a full-on disability, but friends, family with serious health concerns. How do you help them? Because hopefully you would want to. One really good way that kind of refers back to schools is taking notes for them. I missed a million days of school because of all these health issues. And so when I was at University of Guelph, I applied for the official note-taking program where you can get kind of extra credit and all those things if you take really good notes and then give them to whoever applies for that and is granted by Student Accessibility Services. So if you know, you don't need to be in university, high school works too. If you know that you have a classmate that has to miss school for whatever reason, offering to give them your notes is really, really nice thing to do, and they'd appreciate it, so they don't fall behind more than they have to. I actually, when I was in high school, before Blythe actually, there was a group that my grade made that they called Marks for Mitch, a Facebook group. And so I was kind of getting out of school because my health was just so bad back then, as you saw in the documentary. And so a friend of mine created a group called Marks for Mitch that basically the entire grade joined, hundreds of people, to upload their notes for whichever class they were in, so I could use them and study for exams best I could. And then someone else in my grade unfortunately got cancer and was also missing school. And so then we edited the group name to Marks for Mitch and Michael, right? So that was my friend's initiative. I didn't ask for that. I didn't think of that. But a friend of mine was thinking for me and being compassionate and went through all that of organizing it. So look for opportunities is basically the point here I'm making. But it's also unreasonable to say that you can't do things just because your friends or classmates with a disability can't do those things. It's not like you need to totally be inclusive in every single thing you do, but you should go out of your way or stay focused on what you can do. Like, for example, if I would go to parties and everyone would kind of be standing up in a circle, having conversations with their drinks in hand and all that, and I could not stand for more than a couple minutes because of pain, and so I'd be sitting down like at a table and not kind of be left out of the circle, not because they're trying to exclude me, because they're just not thinking, oh, he's sitting down, and maybe many people at the party don't even know that I have a leg pain in any way at all. So I guess that goes back to staying on the lookout for opportunities where you can be inclusive. Doesn't mean you need to be inclusive in every single thing that exists that you want to do. Young me, unfortunately, didn't have the confidence to just say, can you guys move over here? What gave me the confidence in so many different parts of my life would be getting that EDS diagnosis. That was where I can just say, oh, I have this rare condition you probably never heard of, and so I cannot stand up, so can you guys move over here? But if I'm just like look normal and saying, trying to explain out of the blue when I don't even have a diagnosis, I didn't have the confidence to do that. Now I do. And being in high school, I know is hard to build that. But you just do your best, and it always gets easier each time you try. And so at party, people call them party tricks when people have EDS. You're not supposed to do party tricks, is what the doctors say, because we want validation so badly that sometimes we won't listen to our doctors. And when someone seems to like not be understanding the extent of what we deal with, we'll do these kind of weird moves that only someone with a hypermobility condition can do. And I still say it's a good idea to not do them often, like every time you see someone new, to explain things, but for science, right? So just really hypermobile. This is actually one of the ways they can diagnose the condition. Can your thumb touch your hand? With my pinkies, I saw people in that corner talking about being double extended, which isn't a scientific term, but it explains the point. My pinkies actually don't have range of movement. It can be that way or it can be that way, and they just snap back and forth. There's all these different things. My skin stretches to a ridiculous degree. These are all EDS things. And so that's kind of why it feels so tempting to show these party tricks to you all the time, because I look normal, but if I start doing all these things, you begin to understand, wow, his joints do not work properly. Wow, the glue in his body, his collagen, does not work properly. That may cause a lot of problems or pain, and then you have a better understanding. But if you're not trained like Toria, for example, you don't want to do those things too often just to get some validation. So then there's a kind of another idea. What's actually worse? Looking healthy while being sick, or looking sick while being sick? On the one hand, no one wants to look sick for the most part. We want to look nice, healthy. But on the other hand, there's all these problems of having an invisible condition if you look almost totally normal at first glance. So it's kind of an interesting conundrum. Which would you rather have? Everyone can think for their own. And then I had an argument with my older brother all the way back in 2010 or 2011, one of those dark days from my life. And so my brother Evan had cancer, thyroid cancer, when he was quite young, like 11 years old. And so I was not in a good mental state, as I discussed in the documentary. In these years, I did not have my EDS diagnosis yet. At that point, as you know, people weren't really believing that I had a physical condition at all. No one was calling me a pain faker, thankfully, but they were saying, all your medical tests seem to be negative, so we think you're in pain, but from depression, because you were sick with swine flu for so long. So maybe you have conversion disorder. I don't know if the psychology students here have learned about that specific term, but it's when you have mental trauma that is causing physical symptoms, and it doesn't need to be just pain, but that's one. And so I was telling to my brother, and I was kind of in strained relationships with my whole family because I felt I wasn't being believed. But basically, I said, you don't understand what it's like to be me in this situation. And his response was, I had cancer. I was sick for quite a while. I do understand. But I disagreed. because although I'm not saying one's worse or better than EDS or cancer. That's not what I mean. What I'm meaning is they both have different problems. If you say you have cancer to someone, there is immediate understanding and sympathy. Everyone knows family or friends who have suffered from cancer. Who knows about EDS? I didn't know about EDS back then. So you get maybe more understanding and sympathy in one situation compared to the other. And so I was basically in the high school I went to before Blythe, almost directly kicked out because I was flunking half my classes, not because I wasn't trying, but because I'd forced myself to go to school. And I'd literally just fall asleep in class because I wasn't on any of those sleeping pills to help me sleep decently, or I'd fall asleep in the hallways between classes, or I wouldn't be able to go to school at all. So it's not because I wasn't trying. I was trying probably harder than anyone in my grade, and I still ended up failing half my courses in grade 10. And so my school was basically saying, we don't think this is working out, and weren't really willing to accommodate me in any big way. And so I did leave that school and put school on hold for years to focus on health, like I should have done long before that, since I just failed half the grade anyway and could have gotten better first, then passed the whole grade. So, but anyway, everyone was basically shoving me towards school because there wasn't the understanding and sympathy yet. The problem for EDS is that it's so rare, of course. Cancer is all over the place. And so, for example, in one class that I failed is music. And it's not, I'd say I was an average musician before things got really bad with health. And then when I wasn't able to practice like I used to because I wasn't feeling well enough, then I'd say below average, but I wasn't terrible. I don't think I was terrible. It's just that I wasn't able to take the time to learn all the songs we were supposed to learn. And so when we were getting evaluated on those songs, it was given a 0 basically. And so I failed music. And basically I fainted at one point in music class. The school called an ambulance, 911. I go to the hospital, and the students ended up being more concerned than the school was, because all they see is someone failing all their grades and they don't have a diagnosis to explain it. And so I, at that time, started the Bend or Break memoir, not documentary. It was a blog at the time. Now it's kind of been collected into a memoir. And I did that to explain to my friends why I was acting so strangely, why I suddenly showed up in school with a cane, why I was sleeping through classes and all that kind of thing. And then it kind of grew from there. I changed the name from Mitch Blog Group EDS to Bend or Break not long before I met the documentary directors. And so then it kind of blossomed from there. After the documentary release, there's now 500 members in that blog group. You're all welcome to join it. It's on Facebook and in other places as well if you don't have Facebook. But my point is I was finding so many avenues to try to explain to my friends why I suddenly stopped being Mitch in a lot of ways. I was just too exhausted to be me. I couldn't hang out much, even outside school. I was too busy going to doctor's appointments. But it's not like all the principal and all those staff decided to join my blog group so they could understand what I was going through, right? So what's the lesson that the school was trying to give in failing half my courses, especially music? Because when you fail a student, it's to teach them some sort of lesson, to apply yourself. You weren't trying hard. I was trying so hard, right? And it's kind of music. It's not like you should try hard at music just as you try hard in other classes, but it's not the same in my mind as math, where you really, even if you're trying hard and you need to know math to advance beyond to the next math and all those kinds of things, and then have a lot of certain jobs. So if I failed in math, I'd have a better understanding. But what were they trying to teach me by failing me in music, for example? It didn't teach me any lessons. All it did was make it take longer for me to graduate when I returned to school, to Blythe, not that school, thankfully. And so there just wasn't the compassion that I got at Blythe. Blythe is, of course, smaller, and this is why there's a lot of people that are very think it's very important not to increase class sizes too large. Maybe it's helpful when it's kind of a smaller group to pay more attention to the individual, because they're looking at the old school, looking at the whole grade, looking at the averages. They want to keep everything high, and so they'll just boot someone out rather than accommodating them if they're problematic in some way, even if it's not their fault. Life was the opposite of that. And so that's why I'm so kind of grateful and happy to come back, although I was at the Thornhill campus, to get to speak to some Blythe students, because I had a great time and learned a lot and did well here because of the way Blythe was willing to accommodate and understand. Even when I was on morphine, I was still able to succeed, just at a far slower pace than would be normal. And so I was able to stop school for a while. I put my focus on health. And so like it just all kind of made school in the end go slower by me actually going to school in grade 9 and 10 when I wasn't going to be able to pass anyway. So going to school probably made me graduate slower than if I just said, okay, this isn't working. But there was a lot of pressure put on me. There's the PTSD of people not believing. And so I wasn't going to get very good reactions from those around me if I say, I'm not going to school anymore. And so the funny thing is, the ironic thing is, the better you handle your illness, the worse people treat you. Because if you're handling it well, then people think, oh, it's not so bad. If you're coping well, people think, well, it's hard to imagine that I would be coping that well if it was as bad as he says, so it must not be that bad. And so it's a problem, and quite ironic at the end of the day. The other picture I wanted to show is the cells. There they are. So these are various skin cells from skin biopsies. Top left is a normal skin cell list. That's someone who does not have EDS. There are many different types of EDS. I have the hypermobility type, which a lot of people say is the most painful one, but the least dangerous. Other types, like the vascular type, not as painful, but very deadly. Half of people who have that type of EDS will be dead by their 40s. And so that's, in terms of cures through gene therapy, is what it's being focused on first, which I can understand. And so these are, the other pictures are different types. I think the top right is the hypermobility type. I could be wrong. And so you can see that the skin cells are not in an orderly clumped fashion. They are more weird shaped, and there's spaces between a lot of them. And so that's why this works, is they're not stable, just like my joints. And then the next picture, yeah. Doggy. Here is a dog with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So he's also super stretchy for the exact same reasons. Animals can get it too. I don't have a picture of a cat, but they tend to have really, really like drooping wrinkles because their skin is like loose and falling off their face. So if you've seen a cat like with like a million folds of their like face that are kind of drooping off, they probably have EDS. And then the last picture. So I was showing you that exact thing on my hand before. This is not my hand, but that's one of the tests they can do to see if you have EDS. They test your hypermobility in various ways. And you can do skin biopsies to look at your skin and try and diagnose it through that as well. There's another kind of story I wanted to tell related to school. When I went to Blythe, I did a co-op at a veterinary clinic. At the time, I wanted to be a veterinarian more than anything. I love animals. And so I had the idea of doing a co-op and get a couple credits through Blythe doing that while a teacher kind of supervised, and I'd come into the school once in a while to say how things are going. And to me, the co-op went really, really great. To the supervisor, who's the senior vet tech at the clinic, I had the highest outstanding evaluation you can really get. But there were problems that actually made me realize that my dream is not possible, or for now, things would need to improve a lot. And so this is another example of Blythe caring more about individual justice because of this incident that happened. I have already said a few times that I can only stand and walk around for a few minutes at a time. And so working in a clinic is problematic. Basically, I would get around the office on a rolling chair. And as you might imagine, in kind of cramped office corridors, it's tricky. I try to go through a doorway, someone else going through the other doorway, and one of us would have to like back out and let them through. It's not a big deal, right? But it was kind of concerning to me. And so I was supposed to work with one veterinarian supervisor who's a family friend, actually, and she got throat cancer just right before I was supposed to show up. She's okay now, thankfully, but she wasn't able to supervise me as we planned. There was a different veterinarian so they weren't the vet tech doing the evaluation, but I was working with them as well. And so at one point, I passingly, like not expecting it to go anywhere after, but I was explaining I was more apologizing for kind of getting in the way sometimes, even though it just basically wastes 5 seconds for someone to back up and let the other person through the doorway. But I still was maybe annoying to some of the staff. I don't know, no one said that, but I was concerned. It was in high school and everything. And so I told the veterinarian, who I didn't really know, sorry for sometimes getting in the way. And he responded by saying he thought I could do more with my legs than I was doing. And he didn't know what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was. How is he qualified to tell me what I can do with my own legs, right? What's too painful and what's not. And so I found that to be very upsetting. And he clearly wasn't understanding what I was going through health-wise. So my response to that, which maybe isn't the best response, but it's what I did, was to say, my pain is so bad that a couple years ago I committed suicide because of it and barely survived. And his response to that was, people don't want to hear that. So when I told this story to my teacher at Blythe, they passed it on to the principal, to everyone else, and they were actually even more outraged than I was. They wanted to maybe even sue this veterinarian for discrimination, all those kinds of things. And so they were actually like more outraged at how he was treating me. Blythe knew exactly what I was going through and how hard I try academically despite that. And so I'm actually going to, my other leg is getting tired, so I'm just going to move it that way. And so that's another point about individual justice and why I really appreciate Blythe as a school. And they really care about their students, and they are really looking out for you and will go to bat for you to sue the veterinarian. But I didn't want to do that. I said no because I was hoping to be a veterinarian, and basically antagonizing, causing a big battle with the local veterinarian isn't the best route to that dream of mine. But with some reflection, I realized that it wasn't a realistic dream to work in a vet clinic. I wasn't interested in being a veterinarian researcher. I wanted to work with the animals. That's what I was good at, not have them tested on in a lab. Not that I'm totally against all animal testing. That wasn't my dream. So I moved on to a different dream, which was to eventually go to law school, be a lawyer. And then I went to University of Guelph. I have 9 courses left to graduate. I did well there thanks to student accessibility services accommodating me. And unfortunately, then all these health problems got even worse. I had a stroke, which made it impossible to read. I had sleep issues, which made it impossible to read textbooks like I was able to before. Got most of my courses done. And so I have yet to graduate and can just hope that I recover enough to go back and do those last 9 courses. I even actually got a life-threatening condition while I was a student at Blythe called serotonin syndrome. And that came about because I had too many doctors prescribing too many medications without communicating with each other. Serotonin syndrome is when you have too much serotonin in your brain, and if you have it, it will drive you insane, like not you're in too much pain and you're going to go crazy. No, it will drive you insane and it'll kill you if you have too much serotonin in the brain for too long. And it was happening. I was getting really irritable and I had no reason why. My mood, the big reason I never even thought I was depressed personally was because I thought I was miserable because my mood always matched what was going on physically. There was never a time where I was sad for no reason or mad, irritable for no reason. But this time I was irritable for no reason that I could think of. And I was getting a really high fever, I was sweating profusely, and I had an exam at Blythe that day. And luckily for me, I was at Blythe, not the other school, because they would never have suspected that I was cheating, but it messes with your stomach. So I had to go to the bathroom like every 10 minutes throughout the entire exam. That's not an exaggeration. So it's not like they were thinking, oh, he's going to the bathroom to cheat or something. They're concerned. They're extremely concerned. They see me all messed up. And I go home and I have the idea of what's going on because I just started all these medications. So I Google the medication names. I then Google my symptoms along with them. And serotonin syndrome comes up. I tell my doctor, he says, you're right, get off those medications. And then I did, and I got better. And then it happened again 2 years later. So it was frustrating. But there's that story. The compassion, not the suspicion that I'm not trying and I'm trying to coast with accommodations or something. And I ended up acing the exam because they gave me the time I need to write it. I aced an exam while I was basically dying and going insane. So I'm proud of myself. The next thing I want to show is the grad clip. This is a clip, just a couple minutes or less, from my Blythe graduation. And it's a really emotional clip. Basically what's going on is they were presenting the various awards to certain students. Each kind of teacher of that student would then go up and start talking about that student and then tell, and when they're done talking, say what the name of the student is. So the student would go up, shake their hand, take the award, sit back down, move along. And so here's my teacher, that's me on the left there, from Blythe. And here's how she here's the interaction. Here you see. Am I in the way? Is it on the highest volume possible? But if not, I can just give the gist of it here. So she was saying that doesn't matter what you're enduring, if you really try, you'll end up succeeding, is basically what she said. And so she was actually shedding tears because she knew how hard I tried to reach this graduation. We were working together in almost all of my classes, sometimes in a private class, where the class would begin at 3 p.m. because with my sleep disorder, I didn't wake up until 2 p.m. And so I was being accommodated, grabbed the award. And so she kind of broke down into tears before. So she was saying that no matter doesn't matter what you're enduring, if you really try, you'll end up succeeding, is basically what I said. And so she was actually shedding tears because she knew how hard I tried to reach this graduation. We were working together in almost all of my classes, sometimes in a private class, where the class would begin 3 p.m. because of sleep disorder, I didn't wake up until 2 p.m. And so I was being accommodated throughout the work. And so she kind of broke down into tears before she could start saying my name, but just based on what she was describing, I knew she was talking about me. So I went up, gave her a hug, she recovered, and then said, and so here's Mitch. And so it's a really heartwarming clip that I like going back to and remembering how much we both did for each other, to the point that we developed such a beautiful relationship. And I even, starting to spend time on, but I even brought the award from all the way back then. It's a literary one. And so then the next point of this journey was when I was in psych ward, as was, I think, briefly mentioned in the documentary.
following that suicide attempt. And I was there for a few months, not willingly. And I thought this was important to talk about, especially for the psychology students here, because I think they made mistakes that maybe you agree or disagree, but we'll see. So I get to the psych ward straight from the emergency room, which was a problem in itself. As I mentioned, I was on morphine. That's why I was so dangerous, essential overdosing, other things. And unfortunately, they took away every single medication I was on, including morphine, completely cold turkey, didn't let me stay in the hospital, didn't need to be in the emergency room, but even for a few days, because as you would imagine, having morphine withdrawal at the age of 16, while also having about 10 other medications withdrawing at the same time, cold turkey, was not great, and I was already in a bad mental state, as you would expect, given what happened. So there wasn't a lot of compassion given there, but I didn't like my first interaction with the psychiatrist in the psych ward. And basically, I felt it was very patronizing. She was obviously aware that I intentionally overdosed. I had a breathing tube that they used to save me. When I woke up in the ER, I see that I'm awake. I see 6 doctors who are trying to save my life surrounding me, as well as my dad. And all I say when they take the breathing tube out is screaming, "Why am I alive?" And that has 2 meanings to it. One is, thought I'd be dead, why am I alive? And 2 is, why am I alive? Why are you trying to keep me alive? You guys aren't believing me. I had to drop out of school in grade 10. No one knows what is wrong with me. They all think it's a depression and conversion disorder. So why? Why am I struggling through this still? Why are you making me do that when I clearly don't want to? And what the psychiatrist said to me in her first sentence was, "You nearly made it, you know." Like she's trying to shock me by saying I nearly succeeded, as if I didn't know that. I had a breathing tube. I overdosed on morphine, among other things. I was in the ER a second ago and felt awful. So that's what I meant by patronizing. You really know that you almost died? Yes, thank you. That was the point, right? So it felt to me like she was saying, "Oh, you almost made it." So this is the one she was trying to say, but this is like how Regis felt. It was like, "Oh, you almost made it. Just try a little harder next time, then you'll get there," right? So I felt that was the wrong approach for a first-time sentence to say to me. So my better question to you guys is, what do you think would have been better? If you were that psychiatrist and myself in that situation, 16-year-old, suicidal, seated, walked in. Anyone have? There's no wrong answers, because there's also no really right answers. But I'll say my own if no one has a thought. Like what I think. So did you raise your hand? No, it's okay. Here's what I would have said if I were her. What would it take for you to not want to harm yourself again, so we can work together to reach those goals as a team? We ask you to stay with us for now, so we can fully focus on that success without outside distractions. So that would have been way better, I think. I was in the psych ward unwillingly, so to be given the thought, like asking it, like, please stay, not you have to stay until you're better. What's better even mean to me? Because I'm in pain. You're going to make my pain better in the psych ward? No. You're going to tell me all these different mental conditions that you think are causing my pain, which I disagree on. Because sorry if I'm repeating myself in the documentary, but I knew I wasn't in pain because of depression, because after swine flu, when my pain started, I wasn't concerned that much until 6 months later, because that's when I realized it was going to be permanent. It wasn't going away, just like every other time I'd been sick, went away. And so if I became depressed, it would have been 6 months after the pain started. So how does that make any sense? Clearly, pain came first, the miserable state came after, and there was only one doctor of mine who was a sleep doctor who agreed with me, who said, "I don't think Mitch is depressed at all, let alone having conversion disorder causing my pain. I think he's miserable, literally everyone on this planet in his situation, pain and sleep problems would be miserable. And so he ended up being right. Did not have convergent disorder at EDS. And that's why the diagnosis was so crucial. Moving on to another kind of discussion. Is all wearing masks. I really appreciate that. I'm not wearing a mask because with you all being there with them, a bit of a distance, I feel safe enough. And it's always the science is that wearing a mask protects others more than it protects yourself. And so this is good for me. But now there's no longer a mask mandate in most places ordered by the provincial government. And is that a good or a bad thing? Does anyone have any thoughts on the question of should masks be mandatory everywhere forever, or only in certain places, or longer, not forever, but longer than it has been? Yes.
I think it's hard to enforce that rule.
But it was kind of having a mandate up until whenever it was, like 6 months ago or something, maybe more recent. And so it would definitely be hard if you were trying to say they can be in this place, but not the other place. So I agree with that. And it probably is unrealistic to order masks in literally every building that exists, right? Go ahead.
I think it's because the masks are kind of disappearing because it's like all that thing. There really be.
The main concern a lot of people have is that we're now into flu season again, and that always makes things a lot more infectious, being stuck indoors and all that, and spreading more easily. And the good thing about masks is it's not just COVID, because if you Google online and see studies that show it's not just COVID that it's helping, it's basically the flu almost stopped existing throughout the pandemic, the normal flu, because everyone was social distancing and wearing masks. Now it's coming back again and everything. And I'm not saying that my opinion is that masks should be everywhere forever, even though that would make me safe. I think that is indeed unrealistic. And it's just a discussion. There is no right answer. We wanted to get people's thoughts. And then it comes to COVID restrictions, aside from just masks. Should some places not be allowed to open because they're too risky? Places like bars, clubs, and it's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be different in different areas, and that's the problem with a provincial mandate. Is what's really risky in some place may not be really risky in a different part of the province. And so COVID restrictions are a really important point to me specifically because of some of the treatments that I need to function. One of those treatments is actually therapeutic deep tissue massages, where it's not a relaxing massage at all. It's extremely painful. I'm grunting in pain throughout the whole thing, despite my very high pain tolerance. And I basically have to ask the therapist to put as much pressure as you physically can, because it hurts much in the moment, but it feels so much better for the next week or two. And so it's worth it. And my massage therapists say they've never met someone who not just can tolerate such pressure, but asks for it. And then there's another treatment called ketamine infusions. You go to a clinic, they kind of pump you with an IV full of ketamine as a pain treatment. They actually do it at lower doses these days as well for depression. They find that it helps at a lower dose, but for mine, it's very high doses that need to work. And so during the pandemic, particularly March 2020, those dark days, they basically made all these treatments impossible. They closed down all the massage clinics, closed down all the ketamine clinics as part of COVID restrictions. And that was a big problem. I was in so much pain from not having access to these treatments that I became suicidal again and had to drop out of university for a while in March 2020. And I think this is a problem because why are we doing all these COVID restrictions in the first place? To protect the vulnerable, people like me. So if you're causing someone to lose all their treatments and to protect them, and them losing those treatments makes them suicidal, who are you really protecting? You're putting them in danger. So thankfully they got the picture And when they did close things down again for the next spike, they allowed these clinics to stay open if you're an essential patient. So you're not allowed to go get relaxing massages, but if you're needed for your illness, then you're allowed to. And that was an amazing turn of events for me. And so I was kind of thinking that to prevent things like that from happening again, what I consider to be big mistakes when you're trying to protect people, is maybe you should have a panel of psychologists advising the government on how these decisions are going to affect the people you're trying to protect mentally. Maybe they should have a panel of people with disabilities advising the government in pandemic type situation or all situations. Because I feel like if we're doing that, we wouldn't have had these decisions be made in the first place.
Basically, bike to get anywhere. It's the same at camp. This was before I figured out biking was so good for me at camp. So I was walking with the cane everywhere, and that was extremely painful. I often had to go home for a week, come back to give my legs a break. And I was in so much pain in this moment that I was crying, and I was alone, and I was calling kids' help phone. That's the only time I ever did that. First and only time. And while I was talking to them, try to get comfort, they didn't know what to say, by the way, because I'm in terrible pain. No one knows why. I'm at camp and it hurts too much. What are they supposed to say back? So it was a tough situation for them. That's not their usual call. But the reason I'm telling the story is a counselor saw me. You're not supposed to be on your phone at camp, really, right? So a counselor saw me by myself on my phone when all the campers were supposed to be off doing an activity on the other side of the camp. And so the counselor came up to me and kind of yelled at me to get off my phone. Blah, blah, blah. That was a mistake. They should have given the benefit of the doubt, asked, why are you on your phone? By that time, I obviously hadn't been crying as much, I guess, because they probably would have seen that, but it doesn't matter if the person isn't crying. You should give the benefit of the doubt is the lesson of the story. That's a big kind of point I keep hammering on all these different stories, is you don't know what's going on, and you should endeavor to ask rather than yelling and assuming. Then I wanted to show one of the files, which is the doctor letter. Was that? Yeah. The doctor, yeah, that's the one. So this here is a letter from one of my many sleep doctors, and that is accommodation request. Basically, he wrote this for me to send to all my other doctors to accommodate my sleep difficulties. I had to postpone coming here today. You probably know, maybe I was supposed to be here last week, but I slept terribly. I wouldn't have given a good speech. And so the point is it's very difficult to book doctor's appointments when you have my sleep difficulties, because especially back then when I didn't have a certain medication I'm on now, I couldn't predict which days I was going to be awake really in advance at all. My sleep was even worse back then, believe it or not. I was awake 38 hours a day from my pain or brain damage, potentially is the new theory from swine flu, causing brain damage to the hypothalamus, which regulates sleep. So the problem is I didn't know when I was going to be awake, and you often have to book these doctor appointments months in advance. So I can then find out, some days, a week in advance at best, which days I'll be awake, but not months before when I'm booking the appointment. So we can scroll down a bit to now show the ending bit. His request on my doctors is to accommodate this by booking 2 days, not 1 day, those months in advance, 1 day after the next. So if they want to book me in Thursday, also book me in Friday. Because that way, since I'm awake 38 hours a day, and then I sleep up to 21 hours the night after to make up for that, I'm basically awake 1 day, then asleep the next day, then awake again. And that's still the case now. So I was sleeping so badly that I was going to wake up on time properly to come here, like I was supposed to. But so that's kind of a big request to the doctors. And the problem is I'd say 60% of them agreed, 40% of them refused to double book like that. It wasn't going to be double booked the whole time. A week in advance, I can then calculate which day I'll be awake. They'll cancel the redundant appointment. I show up on the days I'm awake, and then everything's fine. But some doctors message back saying, no, we can't book double patients, we're so busy. But the problem is if they don't accommodate me, then I might find out a few days in advance that we need to reschedule and on short notice, and that causes them problems too. So why not accommodate me and prevent those problems in the first place? So it's just all kind of quite silly. And should it be like illegal, do you guys think? Should it be illegal for those doctors to refuse that kind of big accommodation? Or is it sometimes understandable that, for example, one of the people that refused me was my immunologist's office. And as you would expect, an immunologist's office in a pandemic is totally floored with patients and everything. So some ways it's harder than the others, but I need those appointments, and having to cancel them a few days in advance and then rebook up to a few months and waiting again is just not a good idea. Sorry, I saw your hand up. Go ahead. Oh, okay, I didn't hear, but that's okay. Does anyone have any thoughts? Like, because it accommodating me obviously is important to me, but at the same time, it can affect other patients who don't have sleep problems and all that. But it's kind of like an open question. If you don't have any like actual answers, that's okay. I just want you to think about it, because that's kind of a recurring theme: is what should be forced to happen to accommodate those with disabilities versus what should be up to the doctors to decide for themselves. And then with these sleep problems, another big irony in my life was when I had to drop out of school again in university. It was the first time, well, except for March 2020, it was the first time in university having to do that. But in August of 2021, I had a ketamine infusion booked, and I wasn't feeling super great. On the day of the appointment, I was feeling nauseous for a few weeks prior, and I had a condition called hyperemesis in the end, which I didn't know yet at the time. And I didn't cancel the ketamine infusion despite not feeling great. In fact, on my way, when my dad was driving me to the clinic, I said, I'm not feeling great, but I cannot cancel this appointment. I just can't do it, because I knew that if I canceled it, I wouldn't be able to go to university next semester and take 3 courses at a time like I was doing. And I was desperate to do that. I was desperate to catch up with my friends. I was already behind for my age. And in the end, this was counterproductive. Then at the ketamine infusion, which kind of knocks you unconscious because it's so sedating at such high doses. And then it turned out I had this hyperemesis, which is basically throwing up over and over and over, not in a normal way, in a very violent, painful way. They call it the scromiting syndrome. That's the way doctors nickname it, because the patients who have this tend to scream in pain while they're vomiting, and I did. And so I was knocked unconscious while this was happening, and I was throwing up while unconscious. So I was choking on my own throwing up, and so nearly died. And then, well, I was in danger of dying. I don't know about the word nearly, but I ended up in the ER, where they figured out the diagnosis, the hyperemesis, of what was going on. And I was banned for life from the ketamine clinic. Not because I should have canceled the appointment and just canceled the semester rather than taking this risk in hindsight. But basically, they were so scared of the danger I was in that they're not willing to do any future infusions at that clinic. They say, go back to doing them at the hospital. But I do not live downtown. I live in Thornhill, which is 40 minutes north of here. And with having to wake up at 6 a.m., be downtown by 7 a.m., 5 days in a row, because that's what the ketamine infusions were like at the time, when I'm naturally awake one day, asleep the next day, but I have to be there 5 days in a row, it's a nightmare. It was extremely difficult, which is why we moved to this new clinic that was basically 10 minutes away from where I live. And so banning me for life was very devastating. I still haven't been able to get a ketamine infusion since because I was in isolation for being on immunosuppressants. It wouldn't have been safe. And I'm trying to go get them done in Buffalo because they're kind of closing it down across the province for various reasons. But I feel like this is, again, kind of a lack of compassion in that decision to ban me and kind of my first high school shoving me out the door in a way. And so the problem here was that I think it was my PTSD that made the decision not to cancel that ketamine infusion. The PTSD I was talking about of why I would go to school, even though it was counterproductive at the time. I was still worried about people calling me lazy, not believing me. And so I was so excited to go back and graduate and all that. I wasn't mentally willing to cancel the whole semester by canceling that appointment. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was just nauseous and suddenly got worse because ketamine infusions make you nauseous on their own. So that's the irony there, is I was trying so hard to get back to school that I had to drop out because of this huge disaster, because I couldn't use my treatments that caused the infusion anymore. I couldn't get the ketamine. I couldn't use my medications that caused the hyperemesis in the first place. And so that's why I haven't been to school since. Then I was really close to going back with the sleeping medication that helped me when I was talking about that thing. And then I had a stroke. So it's just one thing after the other when you have these kinds of chronic illnesses. And you can get so close and then you beat one problem, but it takes longer than before a new problem shows up. And the next thing was kind of a movie I watched recently that I don't want to really spoil, and I don't think I am much, but I don't know if people know the song Something in the Way by Nirvana, and it's kind of talking about Kurt Cobain, of course, was troubled. He had drug issues that he was trying to overcome, and those eventually killed him in the end. And so while he was in those struggles, he wrote the song, and the point of the song and the name of the song, Something in the Way, is how he keeps trying to get his life back on track, and there's always something in the way. So with the stroke, with the autoimmune condition, that if you got really close to me, you see my eyes were a bit red, my throat's a bit hoarse, but you wouldn't know my normal voice. Basically, my immune system is attacking cartilage throughout the body systemically. And so my ears are not bright red right now, only because I'm putting the strongest corticosteroid cream that exists on this planet before I came here. But I was watching this movie, and this movie played the song Something in the Way, and I wasn't really super aware of the song until I saw that scene in the movie. And basically, I want to give a quote of the line in the movie that was being said by the main character while the song was playing in the background. And the quote really spoke to me and got me like tears in my eyes that it meant, kind of just related to me so much. Vengeance won't change the past, mine or anyone else's. I have to become more. People need hope to know someone's out there for them. This city is angry, scarred like me. Our scars could destroy us, even after the physical wounds have healed. But if we survive them, they can transform us. They can give us the power to endure and the strength to fight. And so that really relates to me because I've said before how I don't feel like I'm depressed. Sometimes I feel miserable. But what I do think I have is anger instead of sadness. Anger internalized, like imagine how angry I was at not canceling that ketamine infusion. I just maybe forced me to drop out of school right before I was going to graduate, maybe forever, I don't know. All because of that mistake of wanting to try too hard. I tried too hard, too much, and it backfired. And so I was angry. And obviously not being believed made me angry. And the way sometimes people still treat me sometimes, maybe like I feel they're not being safe enough with COVID precautions near me. And I know that swine flu destroyed my life. COVID's worse. And now I have an autoimmune condition and sleep disorder on top of all that. So COVID could destroy me even further. So I kind of freak out when I feel people aren't being safe, and that's why I made all these requests for you guys that you graciously complied with. So it feels like I'm fighting my own body. That character is fighting something more eternalized, but I get angry with my own body for being born this way, for not doing what I want it to do. So it's holding me back, and likes to find new problems before I can even solve the previous problems. So my lesson with this quote is, sometimes you first need to survive. You don't need to have a disability for this message to hit home. Sometimes you need to be in survival mode, and you may not be doing all the dreams you have that you want to be doing, but surviving through that so you can then get to that point to achieve your goals is important. You need to be willing to put them aside, focus on your health, focus on your mental health as well, if you're really getting hammered from something. And then you can find happiness. You don't need to kind of expect the expectation of immediate happiness when you get really sick, either mentally or physically. It's unrealistic, and if you're trying to find yourself to be happy and the time where you should be just trying to immediately be in the situation, surviving, putting things on hold, taking the time to heal. And then when you've gotten to that point that you can go back to school, you can take the break you need to focus on what you need to focus on. And then when you're achieving your goals because you set a realistic expectation for yourself, that's when happiness can come. You can't put the cart before the horse is kind of the saying. You can't have your cake and eat it too is another one. And so now I am happy. Sometimes when I get like a stroke, let's say, I won't say I'm happy in the immediate sense, but now I have one of the best support systems in the world. Friends, family, the school when I was there. And it was really, Blythe kind of was one of the biggest support systems I had at a time where so many people weren't being as maybe compassionate as I would have hoped. And if you basically at the end of this presentation, which is coming up, your principal or teachers will give you a list of links that I have provided. I already talked about my blog group. There's going to be descriptions of what each link means. Most of them have to do with social media. And so it would be great if you have the interest in either following or even joining all these different advocacy projects I'm working on for EDS, for people with invisible disabilities. And I'm working on a lot of things. One of these advocacy projects was making this presentation, coming here to talk to all of you. Many others are going on simultaneously. The documentary was a huge project, of course. I did TED Talks. I was invited to York University to talk about these kinds of things. And that's how I met the documentary director. So one project leads to the next. And then it feels like I'm fulfilling my life. It feels like I'm achieving the goal that I set for myself, which is to spread awareness. So I may have an interesting story to tell, but my goal here is to make sure no one has to tell it ever again, so it never happens to anyone else. And that's why I'm trying to spread that awareness so people don't go through what I had to. I was even interviewed by CNN recently. They haven't yet released the interview. It takes time to work on that for them. Said they will soon. So if you were following one of these social media places, you'd know when stuff like that is coming out if you're interested in them. And so another kind of thing I want to talk about is, when it comes to that topic, is not to be afraid to be ambitious in your own projects. Let's use that word again. In your own life. Obviously, they're probably going to be far different in themes and nature than what I'm talking about. But I was in high school, as I was talking about, and not a million years ago. I'm 27, and I had to do high school late because of all this difficulties. And so you're all, I think, well, many of you are experiencing what I remember feeling, especially because of all these challenges with people not understanding what was going on with me, thinking I was having strange behavior. It's pretty strange to but suddenly be sleeping on your backpack in the hallway and having a cane when no one knows why. But then if you kind of do some of the advice that I was talking about for each other, looking out for ways to support each other, putting your kind of dreams ahead, and then working together to kind of achieve them, even though they all may be different based to your classmates. I just know that high school is a really difficult time to have the conference. Like I was talking about, it was hard to have that conference at like a high school party to ask people to move over to include me in their circle of talking. So I hope that you all will be able to follow this kind of advice so that you have the confidence to put yourself out there, because being so vulnerable in that documentary, for example, most people don't want to go talking about their suicide attempts and be so vulnerable, and my family did the same, showing their vulnerability and concern for me. So look at what it achieved in the end with all these different links in the chain. One project leads to another. Now 20,000 plus people have seen the documentary, 6,000 film festival, 14,000 on YouTube, where you can easily see it and share it. And I hope you do to people you think would be interesting to. And so I hope you're able to also have the confidence to be vulnerable. And when you know someone's vulnerabilities, it's easier to help them through them if they want the help. And so the last thing I'm going to say before the Q&A is another quote from media. This one's a show, not a movie, Game of Thrones. Lord Eddard Stark always said winter is coming. That's not the quote though, but yet another lesser known quote, which is what his son in the show, Bran Stark, asks, how can you be brave when you're afraid? And Eddard Stark replies, well, that's the only time you can be brave. And I think that's a really good quote to think about in what I was just saying. And it's not like I wasn't afraid to be so public in that documentary. I very much was. But it worked out so well, couldn't really have worked out any better in my mind. And so now I have so much more confidence that I'm able to come be interviewed by CNN or come speak to high school students I haven't met yet and all that kind of thing. And so just like one project leads to the next, one level of confidence leads to the next level. And if you need to put like on a performance where you're projecting confidence, don't feel it. I think it is fake it till you make it thing. And so do keep that in mind. Even if you're feeling anxiety or fear, it gets easier. It does each time you try to confront it. Even if the very first time it's unsuccessful, you work at it and it works. It takes time is the point here. Take time to know yourself in the end, of course. You're in high school. Soon you're going to be in university for the most part. And so this is the best period you have to figure out who you are to yourself. You don't need to explain it to anyone else than yourself unless you want to. Obviously, it's helpful for going into a secondary level of education. But that's my point, is it's hard to have confidence when you aren't sure who you are yet. And this is the perfect period that you're in to work on that. I had to lose childhood friends because I just wasn't able to hang out properly and I was acting so strange and everything. And now I have even more friends. I joined support groups for people with this condition and other conditions. And now we support each other. I have like a gaming group because it's so important to us with physical limitations to have that mental stimulation, and social groups because we're stuck indoors in isolation for most of the pandemic, for example. And now I have an amazing support system because we worked on it over these decades. And so again, that took time, but now I was able to make a documentary with my immediate family talking about what we all went through together. And actually a necklace button that I have to wear, it only works at home. What was that? Oh, wait, here's the thing. So basically, if I'm in danger, I just click that button and then someone from this company you pay for calls me. If I don't answer, they call my family. If they don't answer, they call 911. So I think I haven't met or heard of anyone under the age of like 70 having to get one of those. But the point is you do what you need to do, even if they're like inconvenient and frustrating, right? Because it's your life. And so now I'd open up questions for a Q&A. If anyone prepared any or has any that came up during the presentation. It's okay if not, because I know we discussed quite a bit. And yes.
Hi, yeah, when you were looking for specific accommodations, so when you were at Blythe, what was kind of your process? Like, who did you reach out to first, and what did you find most helpful?
Well,
those things that you wanted but kind of needed the confidence to ask for.
So I think an important thing that I did was helping to explain the situation before I even kind of showed up on the campus. I think that smoothed the transition of going from psych ward to a high school I'd never entered before. Talking about my challenges, of course, being waking up at 2 p.m. every day was difficult to accommodate, but that's why private classes as an option were extremely helpful. And that's how it was even easier to develop such a great relationship with teacher, principal, everyone. So to the point that we went to bat together, and then there was that graduation short video as well. And so at the University of Guelph, it's a similar thing. I actually chose Guelph to go to because they were famous for having one of the best accommodating programs in Ontario. And because of that, there was, for example, they run a pain support group, they run a mental health support group. They have those note-taking programs, and I was happy to return the favor when they asked me. For example, they asked me to come back to campus, even when things were mostly online, I did it twice actually, to be on a panel for incoming disabled students, meaning it's kind of like sitting at a table with a couple other people who are students with disabilities that work with student accessibility services. And then all the incoming new students to university who have disabilities come up and ask questions and similar questions to that. How do we get the accommodations? What accommodations are available? What advice can you give us? And so I was really happy to do that because I felt like I was returning the favor of the way that they were treating me so well throughout my studies there. So it's a team back and forth, you know. No problem.
Any other questions for Mitchell?
Yes.
Was that a quote from Batman?
Yes. I didn't want to give specifics because of spoilers, but yes, I won't. I think it's okay. But yes, I was deciding whether or not to say it in a Batman voice, but I figure with my slightly hoarse voice, I would have just been cracking my voice and embarrassed. Where's the Joker? It's the best I can do. Where the drug is going?
Any other questions for Mitch?
Rachel.
I would like to thank Mitch for coming in. Thank you very much. Can we please give a round of applause for Thank you again, Mitch, for coming in. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching the documentary.